TheeLitOne, what's poppin'? We are on Twitch. We're not live, but you can leave a like, comment, subscribe, turn on your post notification bells. Let's continue to grow the family. From Chicago to the UK, right behind me, you see it. Little warning screen. Just in case. It's for my ignorance. It's not for anything else. I'm warning you. Twitch.com is where you can't catch a live stream. Usernames at the bottom of the screen. And we also got Patreon Monday through Sunday. Premier League highlights, UK TV shows, UK movies. Obviously, that's stuff we cannot watch on YouTube. So it's there if you want to check it out. Links down in the description. This is Knowledgia. Am I subscribed to that? The British-American War of 1812 explained in 13 minutes. Because high school tried to explain it to me in a 40-minute class, and I never got it a week straight. I just wasn't paying attention. Talk to me.
Copyright disclaimer. Under Section 107 of the Copyright Act 1976, allowance is made for fair use for purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, and research. Fair use is a use permitted by copyright statute that might otherwise be infringing. Non-profit, educational or personal use tips the balance in favor of fair use. No copyright infringement intended. All rights belong to their respective owners.
In 1812, the young nation of the United States took on the country with the most powerful navy in the world in a war that would affect more than just the...
So we took on... Okay, yes, the United Kingdom, they had Canada in their empire at one point, obviously in 1812. So when we went against this part, everybody slid for the United Kingdom, obviously. Everybody who was part of the nation and in the Navy, in the forces, slid to this little piece of the United States. So basically, y'all jumped us. Y'all beat us up at an unfair advantage. But this is what the United States get for jumping up out their body, right? Okay, wait, let me finish.
The former colonies and their colonizer. The United States of America first gained freedom from the British in an 8-year-long Revolutionary War that finally came to a close when Britain inevitably recognized the independence of their 13 former colonies on September 3rd,
Bet you wish they could take that back.
1783. One of the most...
Y'all want these back, don't y'all? This worth $6 trillion. I just learned this in another video. This alone.
Most relevant impacts of this war that would fuel future tensions between the US and Britain once again was the role of the Native Americans. And as a fan of our channel, you should check out...
Hold on, this is my people, the Native Americans. What we do?
The topic of aggressive history of the war. We have a 65% yearly Native American from the US support.
So this is it really 13 minutes? Because that ad was 1 minute.
During the Revolution, the Native Americans mostly supported the Brits, who they hoped would continue to restrict expansion from the US settlers into Native American territory.
Okay. This is new information.
When Britain failed to maintain its rule over the colonies, the United States eventually accelerated its takeover of native land, causing even more friction between the American societies. This friction only grew stronger as the years went on, as Britain remained a driving force of the discord, since not only had the natives taken its side in the Revolution, but...
Look, Chicago in there. Chicago in there. I'm trying to tell y'all.
The British also openly encouraged the Native Americans to fight back against their antagonists. By 1812,
did they help though?
This, combined with a few other factors, led to the development of a new war. While the United States was clearly unhappy with the united opposition from Britain and the natives, they were also infuriated by allegations that the Royal Navy was utilizing a tactic known as impressment to take US men for their own troops. On top of this, the ongoing strife between Britain and...
Wait. They did what? They took US men for their own troops? How? We need more detail.
For their own troops. On top of this, the ongoing strife between Britain and France had a notable impact on the United States. Heavily locked in their own struggle, the warring nations tried to restrict trade from neutral countries and punish anyone who attempted to ignore the constraints. This put the United States in a detrimental position due to—
Sound like what we're doing now with all these tariffs. But, you know, I don't know too much about politics. But it just sounded similar.
To their inability to— This put the United States in a detrimental position due to their inability to continue trade with either nation unless they wanted to risk invoking the wrath of the other side. While France took a more laid-back approach to ensure the US abstained from doing business with the British, the latter was more aggressive about the matter. On January 7th, 1807, Britain issued an order in council stating, "It is hereby ordered that no vessel shall be permitted to trade from one port to another, both which ports shall belong to or be in the possession of France or her allies, or shall be so far under their control as the British vessels may not freely trade."
Boy, y'all hated France. What was that about? I need to get that video. Where is that video? Because throughout y'all history, y'all storied empire, France has been a thorn for y'all. Not now, but like y'all couldn't stand France. What happened?
Furthermore, any ships that refused to obey these restrictions would be subject to seizure by the Royal Navy, cargo and all. By November, the original order was expanded, now to include all the ports and places of France and her allies, or of any other country at war with His Majesty, and all other ports or places in Europe, from which, although not at war with His Majesty, the British flag is excluded, and all ports or places in the colonies belonging to His Majesty's enemies. In retaliation, France, under the command of Napoleon Bonaparte, issued the Milan Decree, which said that every ship, to whatever nation it may belong, that shall have submitted to be searched by an English ship or to a voyage to England, or shall have paid any tax whatsoever to the English government, is thereby, and for that alone, declared to be denationalized, to have forfeited the protection of its king, and to have become English property. Adding,
dang. But they ain't got no choice. If England jumping on ships and doing whatever they want to, they ain't got no choice. People still had to make a living. Y'all de-recruiting people?
On, Napoleon declared that any of the aforementioned ships that enter French ports or those of French allies are good and lawful prizes of his nation. Forced to reply, U.S. President Thomas Jefferson signed the Embargo Act in December of 1807, blocking—
The Embargo Act, that's familiar. Okay.
Thomas Jefferson signed the Embargo Act in December of 1807, blocking all international trade from American ports and taking direct aim at Britain. Unfortunately for America, the act backfired and turned the US into more of a victim than anyone else. Emphasizing this point, the Minister to France himself—
We should have just minded our little business. Now we getting victimized.
even said, "Here it is not felt, and in England it is forgotten." The effects of the Embargo Act ultimately pushed the US into an economic depression, and it had to be repealed less than 2 years after the initial signature.
Yeah, we couldn't get no food, we couldn't get nothing in there. Yeah, y'all was starving. Y'all done starved yourself out.
In its place, the Non-Intercourse Act was passed.
So what, everybody had to be a virgin?
After the initial signature. In its place, the Non-Intercourse Act was passed, which directly forbade trade with Britain and France and their colonies. When this new act still proved to be ineffective, the United States—
That's crazy.
tried once again, this time passing Macon's Bill No. 2 in May of 1810. This bill lifted trading bans and stated that if either France or Britain removed their own restrictions, the US would re-establish an embargo with the opposing nation. By August, Napoleon enacted a plan to exacerbate tension between Britain and the United States, and it ultimately worked. He first told the new president, James Madison, that he intended to exempt the US from his previously established Berlin and Milan decrees, promoting Madison to bring back the Non-Intercourse Act constraints against Britain in November of that year, despite the fact that Napoleon never actually followed through on his proclamation.
Sneaky. He trying to backdoor us. How you gonna promise something? Okay.
Britain and the United States were now on the brink of all-out war. The final straw, Napoleon's constraint and Milan, that it ultimately did a plan to exacerbate with the Britain removed their own restrictions, the US would re-establish an embargo with the opposing nation. By August, Napoleon enacted a plan to exacerbate tension between Britain and the United States, and it ultimately worked. He first
broke. Oh my God. Napoleon just... That's really backdoor energy. He was like, all right, we'll take that. So do that to Britain. And never held up his end of the embargo. That's backdoor. That's like robbing the plug. Napoleon robbed the plug. Ran off on him.
Told the new president, James Madison, that he intended to exempt the US from his previously established Berlin and Milan decrees, promoting Madison to bring back the Non-Intercourse Act constraints against Britain in November of that year, despite the fact that Napoleon never actually followed through on his proclamation. Britain and the United States were now on the brink of all-out war. The final straw came when the Battle of Tippecanoe unfolded in late 1811.
Right in Chicago.
As the
Native Americans is firing bow and arrows, and these dudes with muskets knocking us down. That's tough. They done got both my people, my Native American people and my African side.
U.S. troops claimed victory over the Native Americans, wishing to stop further expansion once again. Given the United States was fairly confident in the belief that the British were supplying the natives with weapons from Canada, a faction of the U.S. Republican Party known as the War Hawks began a heavy push towards an official declaration of war. At last, on June 18, 1812, President James Madison signed the declaration against Britain, despite contention about the issue coming from both the House and Senate. Another problem emerged as well when Britain decided to suddenly repeal their trade restrictions before news of the U.S. declaration of war.
You couldn't stop it?
Actually reached the British over a month later. Aware of this delay, Britain decided not to immediately respond to the call of war and waited to see how the Americans would react to their repeals. When the US got wind of this surprising development, they were, in turn, unsure of how the Brits would react to their declaration of war. Ultimately, the United States decided to follow through on its proclamation.
Why? Who was bro's right-hand man? Who was the vice president? Who was allowing this? This could have been avoided by the United States. Not saying that I'm Native American partially, so at the end of the day, but I live here. We could have avoided this.
And did so by invading Canada, which was a British colony at the time. While the American troops hoped to capture Canadian land to force Britain into negotiation, they had no such success. No one was prepared for war. The British and French had been busy fighting their own battles, and the US military was grossly ill-suited to take on the likes of Britain. The defeats were plenty and humiliating for the Americans. One excessively humbling loss for the US happened when General William Hull surrendered Fort Detroit on August 16, 1812, and
Detroit ain't been the same since. It's crazy.
his own army to the British troops and allowed Michigan territory to be deemed as part of Britain. Chased across the Canadian border, as Hull saw the size of his opponent's forces, which was a mix of British and Native American troops, and knowing that his daughter and grandchild were in the fort, he decided to give up without a single shot being fired. Hull's
Bro got him on that hilltop. He was. Hey, whoa. Nah, twin. They outnumber us 6-1. We good. I got my shorty, my OG in there. Nah, we good. I'm not even trying to get into it with them. That's how I just decoded it in my head.
disgraceful failure led to an uptick in Native American raids in the Northwest and British conflict under the command of Major General Henry Proctor. Adding insult to injury, U.S. Brigadier General Henry Dearborn struggled to make any progress on the northeastern border because the militias—
Bro, y'all had the chance to just be like, oh no, they lifted it up. We ain't gotta go there. But then y'all still went there? That's pride. That's pride.
in New England were not supportive of the war and uninterested in coming together for an attack on Montreal. By October, the Americans were finally able to get some momentum as Major General Stephen von Rensselaer led an army of 3,100 militiamen into the Battle of Queenston Heights. Rensselaer sent some advanced units across the river where they were able to hold their ground for some time on a slope just above Queenston and were successful until they were overcome by British forces as the rest of the American troops refused to join the fight. 925 US soldiers were then captured by the British, despite Major General Isaac Brock on the British side being killed during the battle. Yet again, the Americans took another hit in 1813 when an attempt to retake Detroit resulted in a massacre of US prisoners by their Native American opponents.
Yeah. I try to tell y'all, man, Detroit ain't been the same since 1812.
On top of that, Brigadier General Henry Dearborn was replaced by Major General James Wilkins. At long last, though, in September of 1813, U.S. Commodore Oliver Hazard Perry scored a major naval victory at Lake Erie against the forces of British Captain Robert Barclay and opened the gates for more success on the American side. When the Battle of the Thames erupted the following month, the U.S. finally defeated the British and Native American Allied forces. The next spring season, at the Battle of Horseshoe Bend, a U.S. militia force faced off with a Native American force known as the Red Sticks and found victory once again, demanding that the losing side cede roughly 23 million acres of land, which would later become Alabama and span partially into Georgia. Another win for the United States followed in the summer, July of 1814, at the Battle of Chippewa, but it was short-lived as the Battle of Lundy's Lane ended in a bloody stalemate shortly after, forcing the Americans to withdraw. The real deciding factor in the war came when Napoleon faced his first exile, allowing Britain to shift more focus to the discord with the United States. The British sliced through the US, destroying government buildings including the White House as they took control of Washington, D.C. The Brits then tried to push farther into Baltimore by September under the authority of General Robert Ross, but were repulsed at the Battle of North Point, where General Ross was killed. In the battle that inspired the U.S. national anthem, more British troops were fought off at Fort McHenry. As these conflicts raged on, peace talks began in Ghent and eventually resulted—
I'm glad we got the peace. Peace is what is needed. All this bloodshed was for nothing. We clearly could have not even went there, but I guess everything happens for a reason.
In a signed treaty on December 24th, 1814. Still, just as with the declaration of war, the news was delayed and took until February 18th, 1815 to officially be ratified and end the war. The Treaty of Ghent reverted things back mostly to how they were before the combat, with a status quo antebellum.
So all that war for nothing, as usual. That's even nowadays. For nothing.
territory was returned. Britain repealed their trade restrictions, stopped supporting the Native American revolts, and ended their impressment strategies. In the end, the war was essentially a draw, and the only real losing side was the Native Americans, who had high hopes for British help in stopping U.S. expansion. Britain was able to claim...
Britain, we could have had our land if y'all would have just rolled with us. But it had to be some money in that treaty. Something had to be going on.
Claim victory against the French, and in a way, against the U.S. Meanwhile, the U.S. had the pride of more or less winning their second war of independence.
Man, I don't know, man. It's not looking good for the USA in this one. It's not looking good, bruv.